Sorry, you didn't fix it? No. Really?
Let's call meeting to order. Approval of last month's minutes.
So move.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
We do have a public speaker, Cheryl Cox.
Oh, she said. Not show up.
Okay, but we move forward. Michael?
All right, well, thank you. First of all, I'd like to start out on a bit of a sad note. In the past 2 months, or since our last meeting, we've had two members of our RMT family pass away, unfortunately. And Robert Stacker was a mechanic with us. He passed away back in end of October, and then Kelly Wormley, paratransit operator of ours, passed away in November. Obviously, our thoughts are with their families, and just want to take a moment of silence to honor them and recognize them. Okay, thank you. So then moving on, RMT employees who are celebrating an anniversary this month. Actually, in the past 2 months since our last meeting, I'd like to thank those employees for their continued dedicated service to the RMTD and our community. So following employees, and this will be the last one for the year, but a little bit longer list, but the list of employees celebrating anniversary in November and December are as follows. Lane Theobald, fixed route operator, 29 years. Eric Fish, paratransit operator, 26 years. Matt McVinney, building maintenance technician, 24 years. Beatrice Gonzalez, bus custodian, 24 years. Barb Zimmerman, maintenance assistant, 17 years. William Favaretto, fixed route operator, 16 years. Ron Steger, fixed route operator, 16 years. Reggie Coates, fixed route operator, 12 years. Joyce Craig, fixed route operator, 12 years. Turnell Harris, fixed route operator, 12 years. Susan Campbell, 9 years. Ken McLean, paratransit operator, 8 years. Maurice Foreman, fixed route operator, 7 years. Christy Lopez, fixed route dispatcher, 5 years. Luis Hernandez, mechanic, 2 years. Julie Gonzalez, fixed route dispatcher, 2 years. Jasnique McClinton, fixed route operator, 2 years. Amy Parham, fixed route operator, 2 years. Yvette Badu, paratransit operator, 1 year. Began, sorry, Puckett, paratransit operator, 1 year, and Gregor Dumas, custodian, 1 year. So certainly appreciate all those employees and achievements. Moving on, in the realm of acknowledgements, this marks the last board meeting for our current director of finance, Ron Shepard. As you know, Ron has been with us for now 24 years. We'll be retiring in January prior to our next board meeting. So Ron has been an integral part of the RMT success through the years, helping support the board's stewardship of public funds. We certainly appreciate Ron and all of his years of dedicated service. Certainly wish him and his family nothing but the best forward. So Ron, thank you so much for all of your hard work and dedication.
Good job, Ron. Yeah.
That we'd also like to welcome Xavier Whitford. Xavier is taking on the position of comptroller with RMTD and joins us in her second week here, absorbing all of it as RMTD. She comes to us years of extensive service in the city of Rockford budgeting department and a period of time with Ramp as their CFO. So welcome, Xavier.
Welcome.
Moving on then, state and federal updates, not much going on there. On the state level, issues associated with the RTA fiscal cliff aren't being taken up in the state's veto session, so that gets punted to the spring. So we'll continue to keep the board updated in terms of what IPT is working on as it relates to securing our downstate operating programs funds into the future. Likewise, on the federal side, not much going on there. The continuing resolution that Congress passed back in September expires here in 2 weeks. So it'll be interesting to see if that's extended out. It certainly is all the programs and the funding for discretionary programs that we wait for in the spring, our bus and bus facilities, loan grants and so forth will hinge on that getting passed. But as it relates to our current funds and our regular monthly reimbursements that we get for the federal programs, it doesn't compromise them if they're went into a shutdown. So that's just the update on that. So If there's no questions on those items, we'll move into the regular part of the agenda. So first and foremost, we have the finance section. In your packets, there was the Williams McCarthy services rendered through November 20th. And we didn't have anything from, AGHL this month. That was the only thing that was in there. For attorney services, any questions on this? If none, then we'll move on to the accounts or approval of the accounts payable invoices. So total invoices to be approved for this month are $838,446.15. Any questions on the invoices outlined in there? If none, the motion to approve.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great, thank you. With that, then we will move on to item B, which is the approval of the fiscal year end June 30th, 2024 draft audited financial statements report presented by Baker Tilly. And so with us again is Jody Dobson, who heads up the efforts for Baker Tilly and our account, and is here to walk us through the audit presentation and submit that for your consideration. So, Jody.
Thank you very much for having me here today. I know the audit presentation, the short packets are in the packet or in front of you. And so that's what I want to walk through. We're just in the process of finalizing. We've got the draft financial statements all prepared and kind of going through a final proofread and review of those before we sign and date them. But looking at the results for the 2024 audit, I'll start with the district and then have a couple comments specific to the pension plan as we do the audit for both at the same time. So for the district transit operations, we intend to issue an unmodified opinion, or often called a clean opinion. It's the highest level of assurance that we can give, saying that the statement present fairly in all material respects the financial position and the results of operations for the years. As part of the audit, we start by looking at controls and processes and procedures that your team uses to track financial information and allow that then to tell us how to design our tests so that we can obtain the evidence to issue that opinion. Along with that, because you receive over $750,000 a year of federal money, we have to do what's called a single audit for looking at both the controls and the compliance over the grant processes and what's outlined in those agreements. So I'm happy to say that there were no findings related to the grant process at all. We also do some calculations related to the IDOT funding and no findings there. So the only item that we would be reporting this year, which is very consistent with the past several years, is noting that we assist with the preparation of the year-end financial statements. Ideally, the standards would say when we walk in, that entire document should be ready and waiting for us. And I can tell you there are very few governments that have a staff the size to do that as a once-a-year effort. So it's very common for us to assist with that, but we just need to make you aware of that through that communication. The next page here looks at, we've got a couple graphs that look at the revenues for the year. And so the first one is just looking at the breakout of the 2024 revenues. And I don't know that anything here would maybe be a surprise. The large pink area is the state operating aid at 60%. And that's fairly expected and consistent. If we look at the 15% green pie above that, that is federal operating aid, and that may be up a little bit from what it historically had been, just because of some of the ARPA programs that are still available to be used. And so that's something that, actually talking earlier with management, they're looking to make sure that they're fully utilizing all the federal funds available to them over the next few years as well. And then the smaller pieces in there are the various local communities that participate in the programs and the service, and then obviously passenger fares. If we go to the next slide, we've taken those revenues by sort and kind of looked at it over the last 4 years as to how they add up. while we can see the makeup in general still looks very consistent, what jumps out at me is number one, the overall increase over the last 4 years. As you've been able to bring in more revenues to go along with the services being offered and do more things. And then also, if you look at that red slice at the bottom, which may not look like a lot, but it's increased significantly the fare revenue. And so that's a big, note to your ridership over that 4-year period. Next, then we look at the other side of the coin, if you will, the operating expenses. And again, I don't think it's a surprise here that labor and benefits combined are the two largest pieces of the expenses, and total there are about 70% of the overall. And that I would say is very consistent with other transit organizations that I work with. And then followed, of course, by the materials, supplies, utilities, professional services, etc. That miscellaneous item that shows as a negative, what's driving that as negative relates to some of the self-insurance accounting as to what is expensed out or charged to the services towards the self-insurance versus what the actual claims were in the year. So it was a low claim year, and that's why that ends up being driven negative this year. And then the next slide is just looking at the expenses a little differently. So it's the same total expenses, but breaking them out by function, if you will, transportation, maintenance, and A&G versus the type of expense, labor, outside service, etc. And we can see here again that relatively consistent expenses had been going down a little bit, and now in 2024 came back up, but I think that's consistent with the ridership and the revenue and kind of the overall operations there. And again, not surprising that the transportation is the largest piece of those expenses.
Can I ask a question just back on page 4?
Sure.
You mentioned that the breakout of labor and benefits is pretty typical from like other transit organizations. Is the same true for how we have our current breakout of materials versus professional services and insurance?
Yeah, I think so.
That's kind of the breakdown.
Probably the one difference there is, well, you've got purchase transportation as its own line. That's probably the thing I see varied the most between transit organizations is how much they rely on third-party contracts versus internal.
One thing to remind you, since you're a new board member, is benefits include non-working hours, such as vacation, holiday, and sick time. So in my mind, you might be thinking that to be part of labor, and it's not. That the labor part is actual work time.
Okay.
So part of, like I said, the non-working salaries is included in benefits, so that's why that would be a higher percentage than what you might see in other places.
Okay, thank you.
Then on the last page, just a few highlights from the required communications. There will be a complete document issued that walks through all of the AICPA required communications. But ultimately, the financial statements, all of the information in those is management's responsibility. We get all of that information from your team, and we are completing the audit to issue the opinion, and then we do assist with the assembly and preparation of the document. There are estimates included in any financial statement, thinking of things like depreciation, pension liabilities, self-insurance information, etc. For each of those areas, we look at the information each year to make sure it's following the required standards as issued by GASB, that the key assumptions and inputs are supported and make sense as far as what we see in the financial statements overall, and that the methodologies and where the assumptions are coming from is consistent from year to year. So there's not anything or driving swings. We had no difficulties, disagreements, issues at all during the audit. Things went very smoothly this year. There are a couple adjustments that are provided at year end or as part of the audit process. These typically relate to the self-insurance activity, how that gets pulled into the overall report, accumulated depreciation and kind of a year-end depreciation true up, and then the pension and OPEB information coming from the actuarial studies that typically isn't available until year end. But there was nothing related to, I'll say, the day-to-day cash activity of the organization that was adjusted as part of the audit. So that lets you know that you're getting good information throughout the year. Management will sign a representation letter for us, just letting us know that they're committing that they've provided us the information, answered questions, and again, there were no concerns along the way there. And then I always like to highlight that we do make sure we maintain our independence so that we can sign that audit opinion. That is critical to us. Are there any questions before I move over to the pension highlights? Okay. So the pension will also receive that unqualified or the unmodified or clean opinion on the financial statements. We look at the first graph. This is looking at your cash and investments by type over the last 4 years. And again, what stands out to me here is that it's a very consistent and well-diversified mix. So I give you kudos for that, for really good management of these funds. And also that there has been a consistent increase in the funds over the last 3 years. And I think that's both a testament to the ongoing contributions that you've committed to make, as well as the performance of the funds from that mix. And then we pull that number into the next page, looking at how well funded the plan is. This is really looking at that plan net position compared to the total pension liability as calculated by the actuaries. Come up with this percentage. Over the last 4 years, you've ranged anywhere from 95 to 80% funded. This ending 2024 at just over 90% funded. All very positive numbers. You know, we see plans anywhere from nearly 100%. Once in a while, the interest bumps them over to probably 30–40% funded. So it's a huge range of plans across the country, but I think this is a really good position to be in. And then the next page looks at, over again, that 4-year period, your actuarially determined contributions versus your actual contributions. So the last couple of years that's been a little bit closer, but again, you've always been making those contributions and putting in some excess typically. So that's really positive and leads to those numbers we saw on the prior slide. So overall, you know, when I look at things here, we had a very positive audit process. We're just in that finalization, and the numbers and trends all look very consistent.
Any other questions?
It's really good. Yeah, that's right.
So if there are none else, then we submit the audit for the board's approval. Correct audit.
I'll move that we approve the, the fiscal year end June 30, 2024 draft audited financial statement report presented by Baker Tilly today.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Jody and your team and Jalissa in particular, for
Yeah.
all of your help and effort on this certainly successful audit. And
Absolutely.
appreciate your work. And then obviously now to Ron and Tricia and the rest of the team for their help and assistance on that, making it a successful audit. So appreciate their work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, Jody.
Thank you.
Thanks for going, yeah.
All right, so moving on to the next item we have is the approval of the unaudited financial statements for September and October that were included in your packet. Just noting real quick, September had again, maintained a positive variance. Revenues have been trending up and expenses have been within budget, so positive variance on both September and October. Ron, anything would you like to add to those? Otherwise, if there's any questions, happy to answer them. If none, then
Good performance.
give a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve the unaudited financial statements for September and October.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah, thank you. And the last item on the finance section is the pension portfolio review for the period through November 29th, 2024. So including in the packet was the analysis provided by Jeff Benedetto and Associates. And if there's any questions on that, happy to answer. But otherwise, some positive results continued for year to date and this year. If no, let's keep moving on. Yeah, exactly. All right, so we'll move on then to the operations, maintenance and facilities section, the operations report included in the packet, review. Dan, you want to walk us through the operations section, maintenance section, facility section?
Sure, yeah, as you can see, our ridership has continued to grow, both on the fixed route and the paratransit side, especially on the paratransit. We went up almost 1,500 rides from September to October, so we have to keep an eye on our staffing levels there. It's becoming a little more challenging. And fixed route, you know, as you can see by the numbers there's a slight increase in ridership. As a reminder, we started our new routes on September 1st, right after the holiday there. So, any questions on that? Vehicle maintenance report. George has his chart in there. We're overall in really good shape. All our air systems on the fixed route buses, which is imperative with the cold weather coming up. Get moisture in there, it tends to freeze up and cause issues for us. So facilities wise, hopefully never snows, but we're ready for it if it does. So we got all our stuff back up. So projects, as you can probably see from across the street, the project has started. So we have run into a little bit issue with the some substandard soils. So we're processing a change order now. We're going to dig a little deeper than what we had anticipated. I think we were asking for 30 inches. We're going to go 36 to get down to where we need. So we're waiting to get final price on what that change order is going to cost. So that's why they're going like gangbusters, and then it kind of came to a screeching halt once we had to deal with that. So we should be in the temporary door here probably in the next week or so. Just a couple of change orders on that on the temporary entrance ramp. Making a couple of decisions there. Paratransit software. We're continuing to work. We're still somewhat on target on that. We will have in-person training the week of December 16th. We continue to hold some virtual trainings almost every week with the vendor and the telephone system. We're up to version 8 of the draft, and hopefully it might be the last one. So, any questions?
You said that last.
Yeah, I know. I'm gonna get said a couple more times, too, David.
Just overall in the fixed route report, I mean, really strong performance, and I'm just curious, especially for Rockford, to see the revenue tick up that much. I mean, it's just great. Seems too early to tell on fixed route improvements, but do you think it's contributing or just overall ridership increasing?
I think a little bit of both. I think the tweaks certainly have helped. And we don't break it out here, but the Amazon numbers have been good for those changes. Yeah, actually a lot more than what I thought we were going to get out of them. Not just for work reasons, for them, their employees writing the overall system. So
I think the month of November, it was approximately 1,400 rides for the Amazon group. You mentioned revenue, that's one of the contributing items. The increase there, it's the Amazon Limited Access Program revenue is what's increasing that compared to last year. So you're noticing that. Just a couple of notes on ridership, school ridership, the intended changes with the K through 12 pass program and IDs and things like that have had the desired results. And we're seeing, all of those rides. It's free rides now, as anticipated, and a little bit of growth there in where they were last year. And we continue to see month over month growth in the veterans free ride program. So that's continued to tick up again. So yeah, just on those small incremental items, all positives. Dan, the other thing is just on, we did one of the updates was on shelters. We did get a couple of shelters in since the last board meeting, I believe, or in the process of.
Yeah, we got one up on North Main and we're about 75% done, the one at the UPS down by the airport. Hopefully with the weather, a little break in the weather here, they're gonna get the glass and the, trash can up, mounted up tomorrow.
Any other questions? Great. With that, then we will move on to, oh, and then you mentioned about the Trip Spark, or the paratransit demand response software conversion. We're still on target for the go live in mid-January still. We'll be pushing out another customer information notification as we get past the holiday here at the beginning of the year, let people know that's coming.
Thank you.
All right, so next then we'll have our human resources section, the claims report for October. Submitted for your review. Any questions on that? And positive for the month and for year to date. So those good news comparative. Okay. If none on that, then we'll move on to the marketing section. So the first item on that list is the discussion and take action needed on making fare capping program a permanent program for RMT. Included in your packet was a memo outlining the history of that and the data associated with that. So Orlando, you want to walk us through that?
Yeah, so we took a review of how fare capping, I guess, performed over the last year, 14-month period. It was a pilot program, so we wanted to look at how it would work. We know the goal of it was to provide passengers with a more equitable and efficient way of receiving their fares, along with saving them some money as well. So Mike brought it up because he's seen it in his past and thought it would be great for us to do as well. So as we look at it, the numbers are good. It's consistent with our fare year to date when it comes to what we sell the most, which is our adult single rides. So when it comes to finances as well, it saved passengers $2,600 over that year span because of how it works and how it refunds individuals money when they get to a certain threshold with passes. So overall, I think it did what it's supposed to intend to do. Save money and provide individuals with those equitable solutions. So the usership was good for it. 45 total conversions, so that means people are using it. So yeah, I think it's effective and it was pretty good overall.
So a couple points on that. As Orlando mentioned, we had over 4,500 conversions that took place. The bulk of those were in folks. You keep in mind the whole idea of this is to not penalize our riders for their loyalty, right? So the more they ride, the more opportunity they have to take advantage of the next fare category up, of which they may not have had the upfront cost to pay for. So I think the most interesting one in this list where, the all-day pass conversion, which represent the largest percentage, are simply, I bought a $1.50 fare and then I bought another $1.50 fare. And so once I bought two $1.50 fares, the on token transit automatically converts me to an all-day pass. So it's kind of doing the same thing, but from a revenue standpoint, we don't lose any revenue from that. You paid $3. We're just giving you an opportunity to ride all day now for $3 versus individual rides transfer. I think the more interesting one again is the 30-day unlimited rides, which have over 460 conversions, which those are folks who have bought some combination, but more than likely they've bought a 7-day pass and another 7-day pass, and another 7-day pass. And so based on the total value of those consecutive 7-day passes, it converts you into a 30-day pass. So you pick up the extra days, but more importantly, get credited back the money that you otherwise would have paid had you just the opportunity to buy the other one. So overall, over the course of the year, with those 4,500 conversions, it only cost us $2,664 in reduced fare box revenue. But that is, while it's a loss on the revenue side for our customers, it's a gain for those riders that are riding loyally and regularly. It's a benefit we can extend to them. So it's all happens in the back end of the transit. So I think we saw what we expected to see, anticipated seeing, and really were able to quantify the benefits. And so with that, we submit that to the board as a permanent program and moving beyond just a pilot program.
Yeah, I like the idea of rewarding the loyalty and the people who have stuck with the system and
Yeah.
can benefit from that, and it's not a large upfront cost to them to take advantage of it. So.
Can I make a motion to approve that as a permanent program?
Well, I'll move that we approve the fare capping program to be permanent.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. And then also under marketing, for your review was a memo on the results of the Stroll on State event that happened a couple weeks ago. So anyone just brief us on that quickly?
Yes, Roll State, we provided the service that we have for the last several years. 10 fixed route buses and 2 paratransit buses to serve as a park and ride shuttle service that's open to the public as well. During that event, that was from 12:30 to 10:30. So we put together some numbers of ridership that I think was strongly affected by the temperature. So there is a 40% drop off of ridership from last year. But I also noted in the paper as well that it was a 9-degree drop off. So the lowest for that Saturday was 11 degrees. So, and I was out there and it was freezing. It was very, very cold. So compared to last year, we had close to 6,000 riders. This year was a little bit above 3,000. So, we talk about as a staff as we continue to do this moving forward, you know, kind of pressing our needs towards the ridership over the last years, because the most we've reached is 7,900. So just looking at that, but overall, and then Cedric worked the whole day, so shout out to Cedric. Overall, good feedback from riders, positive feedback for those individuals who did ride it. I feel like it was a great source for them for the 3 different locations. So some adjustments that we have moving forward that we talked about, but I don't know if you want to add anything, Cedric, from that day, but I think overall positive for the conditions and kind of what we
I
provide.
think the one thing that we did this year that we never have done, we had one driver dressed as Santa Claus. The passengers went crazy. They loved the idea. People taking pictures, children running up and hugging the guy. He has a real full beard, so it kind of looks like Santa Claus, and him in that suit just made it wonderful for a lot of people. Even though they were freezing in the cold, they had a lot of fun, you know. And I think that's something we might want to inquire to do maybe next year, have somebody dress as an elf. If we can get Baxter to do it next year, great, you know, but people just had a lot of fun.
As a fixed route operator, Dexter Higgins,
Yes.
or senior operators here dressed up, so.
I think you mean if we want Santa to come back.
Yes.
I don't know what the estimates were from Stroll and Seed, is total, what they mentioned in terms of attendance, windows up or down, and we'll see anything.
No, they haven't.
I'm assuming that our numbers are pretty consistent with their.
Did we have the same locations though as last?
Yes,
No,
yes.
everything else was pretty much the same. It was just
So we're
fewer
on
people.
track.
Yeah.
So, normally we would, but we did have a technical difficulty, that day that affected our overall service as well. So basically our drivers weren't able to clock into that technical service
Oh,
that
yeah.
tracks.
The clever systems went down that day.
Yeah, so we had to trace ridership by the old school way of clickers, and not able to, you know, disperse which is coming from where we do.
So did
previously.
annual counts as opposed to.
Yeah, so, right, so we weren't able to see this year those individual locations.
But we know
Capability.
in general, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good. Still a great service.
There's no additional questions there. We'll move on to E6 and grants, the approval of resolution 2408, the update 5007 grant amendment. Paula, you want to take us through that?
Yep, we're gonna be doing hopefully a grant amendment, number 1 of IL 2024-028. Purpose of this is to really just add, shop equipment funds as well as miscellaneous facility funds. Most of it is for the new facility next door. For the maintenance shop equipment, we're adding $1,064,000. It includes tire carousel, bus wash and installation, diesel fuel piping and pumping, fluids distribution to the new facility, floor striping, tire changing and balancing equipment. For the miscellaneous facility equipment, we want to add $375,000. and that's for more furniture funds, office equipment, facility fixtures, IT equipment, computers, some switches, access points to the internet, and also some facilities signage. And so altogether, we're asking for an amendment of $1,439,000. Along with the original grant, that brings this grant amount up to $4,424,890. And again, the resolution and the grant amendment, if you need it approved to submit and execute.
And these were which grant year? 5307 funds.
I'm sorry, right
Because
here?
they were the federal fiscal year 20.
But actually, it's federal fiscal year 25. Yeah.
Right. But the funds come from.
Oh, way back in 20, actually, I believe,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
And actually, it's only a portion. We will be asking for another grant come spring for some more funds, but this is using some lapsing funding from 5307 funds.
Right.
Our regular formula funds.
And then going back to the prior project breakdown, we submitted the board the different funding packages that and what would be funded under what pieces. This was that other to do yet after we got through the IDOT funds for the construction and the FTA funds for the charging infrastructure installation generator. These were the remaining ones to fund for phase 1 and phase 2. So this completes essentially all of the elements to fund the entire package for phase 1 and phase 2.
Might be a little bit more for some charger, but that's
Well,
it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so that.
On the whole, this is the most of the projects.
Yep.
Yeah.
I would make the motion to approve the resolution for the grant amendment.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you so much. Just as a side note, I was gonna mention on one other grant that we had received, just want to provide a quick update on that. It's been several years, we received a grant through IDOT for some state planning money to conduct a mobility management study, which was, the intent was to look at ways to better manage and coordinate activities associated with human services transportation in the community, looking at both seniors, disabled, and low-income populations, and looking at both not only what we do, but other entities in the nonprofit service section, and how to try to wrap our arms around all of it and try to do it in a more coordinated fashion and leverage our that coordination to access and permit them to access grant opportunities and so forth to pay for the services. So very popular from a statewide perspective in other areas of the country, not in Illinois. Actually, the state's starting to talk about this, but this was one of these efforts that we looked at doing regionally. And so we finally got IDOT's approval to go out for RFP for this, and that's on the street currently and open for bid. We'll be closing that bid period in January, and then reviewing proposals from there, and then coming back to the board after that opportunity to review those to move forward. This is a coordinated effort between us and with the grantee, but R1PC is aiding us in this effort to initiate the study and carry that out. But more to come on that, but I think we've talked about it several years ago. Actually, it's something we provide some more information on, but it was an effort to really look at that segment of our populations and services in the community and the region, try to do more concerted effort to coordinate amongst them, and this is bringing some expertise to help us do that. All right.
Thank you.
So no other questions on that. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the safety and training section. So submitted report was the safety and training update report for October and November of 2024. Are there any questions on monthly reports? If none, then we can move on to the other item, which is the approval of RMT's agency safety plan program, the 2024 annual review. So included in your packet was the fully updated plan, along with a brief memo outlining what we updated in our annual review, program elements, and there were a number of items associated with updates to the bipartisan infrastructure law. In each, as part of that review, that is a review that's conducted jointly between management and our labor groups, and through that process, they agree to those updates, agree to the target setting associated with that. And then as part of that, then it gets submitted up to the board for formal approval of the overall safety plan. So memo included there where the changes are, and that's for the board's consideration. Any questions?
Well, I'll move that we approve the agency safety plan program 2024 annual review.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Great, thank you so much. Okay. Now move on to other business. First on our agenda, we have discussion and taking action necessary on the BRT quarter analysis study presentation. So with us today, we have members from TY Lynn, Michael Groh and Matt Overchuck with us here to walk us through the study that they've been working with us and R1PC on for several months here. That's included in your packet. So if you guys want to come on up to the table and take us through that.
Thank you very much for having us today. Perfect. And I guess does everyone has print copies of the slides?
Yes.
Perfect. Great. Well, thanks again. So my name is Michael Groh. I'm an associate with TY Lynn. This is my colleague Matt.
Hi.
And so we'll be giving a summary of a study that we recently completed, working with the RMTD team as well as staff from Region 1. And so we'll, let's see, so the agenda for the presentation is that first we'll talk about the value of BRT for Rockford. Why are we doing the study? Second, we'll talk about the corridor and identification and screening process that we went through. And third, we'll look at the estimated operating and capital needs that came out of that process. And finally, we'll discuss our recommendations for BRT development. And I understand that there was a presentation back in October that discussed some of this material. So we'll be able to review that, but kind of move through some of that material quickly. So the first section, the value of BRT for Rockford. So what is BRT? BRT stands for Bus Rapid Transit. It's a form of transit that creates a high quality rider experience similar to rail transit, but of course using rubber tire vehicles. BRT uses various technologies to achieve a fast, reliable, convenient, and cost-effective service. It's become fairly popular in the United States since the late 2000s. There's a graphic on the slide, what is BRT, that kind of shows an example of one of the BRT stations from Montgomery County, Maryland. So that's just one example of how the types of amenities that BRT includes to kind of mimic rail service. On the next slide, the specific features of BRT include a number of elements that speed up service and create a better customer experience. Of course, BRT isn't necessarily one size fits all, so various agencies across the country choose different combinations of these features. But the specific items that can make a BRT corridor include high frequency service, which helps shorten customer wait times. Traffic signal priority, which helps buses to move through traffic signals and avoid delays. Enhanced stations for customers, which provide a heightened level of amenities. Also, the stations tending to be spaced more, in the ballpark of a half mile apart, so further spaced than typical bus stops. Distinct branding is an important element of BRT, so customers can recognize that they are using a special type of service. Near level boarding is also a feature that's often used at BRT stations, so customers can board without, having to step up onto the bus. It speeds up the boarding process and improves the accessibility. Off-board fare collection is also often used to help speed up the boarding process, so customers aren't paying fares as they board this service. They're just able to pay ahead of time. And finally, bus priority lanes can be used to help buses bypass traffic delays. And all of these come in different shapes and sizes, and depending on the specific agency and specific context. But those are some of the types of features that can be used to create BRT. So why do we consider BRT in Rockford? Why was this study started off? So there are a number of reasons to highlight here. First, BRT can make a large impact increasing ridership. BRT can attract a lot of new riders to the system who might not have considered transit previously. And of course, that's especially important as we're trying to bring back riders in the wake of COVID-19. Economic development is another reason for BRT investments. BRT creates kind of permanent infrastructure along the corridor, which helps to spark investments. I think the most notable example that you might have heard of is in Cleveland. Their Healthline BRT corridor generated a lot of new development. Their equity benefits. Obviously, transit tends to serve disadvantaged and lower income populations. And BRT can improve the service for those populations. Reduced emissions and congestion is also expected, closely tied with the ridership increase. And finally, we know that there is demand for increased transit service in Rockford. The comprehensive mobility analysis that was completed a couple of years ago found that service levels are about 20% lower than some comparable peer agencies that were studied. So there's certainly a market for increased service such as BRT. Next, so our team reviewed a set of peer agencies across the country that have implemented bus rapid transit. And so there's a map on the slide 7 that shows where those peers are located. And we tried to identify peers that had similar populations, similar operating contexts, and understand what they did when they implemented BRT. And so most of those peer agencies included features such as traffic signal priority, enhanced stations, distinct branding, improved pedestrian access. But then there were also some features that were only included by a smaller set of agencies like near level boarding, off-board ticket vending machines, and dedicated lanes. And then finally, from the peer analysis, we also looked at the service levels that peers operated, and we categorized them in terms of what was a high, medium, and low level of service for their BRT lines. And so slide 8 has a table that shows what those levels of service were. And we'll use those levels of service later when we get to the recommendations. So the next section is dealing with the corridor identification and screening process. So this section, I'll go through fairly quickly since this is a recap of what was presented in October. But just to review the process that our team went through, the analysis that was conducted to identify potential corridors. So we started by identifying all of the RMTD bus routes that have a minimum level of ridership, at least 100 riders a day. And we split all of the routes into shorter segments so that we could identify kind of the detailed characteristics of those segments of the routes. I think we had 74 segments in all in our analysis. And we rated those segments based on a number of different criteria. Slide 11 describes at a high level what those criteria were. So we looked at the demand potential in each segment. We looked at social and equity factors for the segments, also operational feasibility to deploy BRT, and in addition, connectivity and integration as a system. So there were a fairly detailed analysis of all of these segments. and the map of the kind of resulting scoring at an overall level is shown on slide 11. So the darker reds indicate more, kind of a stronger market in terms of those factors. And then we kind of went back and we combined the segments into corridors that aligned with stronger markets. And that there was an engagement process with the project team to identify which corridors kind of rose to the top in that process. So slide 12 summarizes the kind of the top rated corridors from our evaluation. And the top two of those were first East State, and then following that, Riverside, Rockton, and Kishwaukee as a combined corridor. And then it's also worth noting that the North Main Kishwaukee corridor was also rated near the top. So all of these corridors shown on slide 12 were the stronger corridors in our analysis. And those were the ones that rose to the top. That starts to get us to the recommendations. So slide 13 shows that we are recommending the first BRT corridor could be Route 11. And so we show that in a yellow line, but we have a dash pattern on the east half of the route, which is trying to indicate that you could potentially focus on the west half of the route, or you could potentially include the entire length of the route. Just to summarize why we prioritize this corridor, it had the highest overall score of all of the corridors. It had particularly strong ratings in terms of demand potential, social equity, and connectivity. And of course, as you're well aware, it serves important medical and commercial destinations. And we think that the most strategic move might be to focus on the western half of the corridor initially between downtown Rockford and Rockford University, because that western part of the corridor has the strongest market, it has the strongest walkability. While on the other hand, the eastern half of the route also has important destinations, but it has more challenges to address in terms of walkability, route deviations off of East State that would potentially be more of an undertaking to address. And so I'm sure this is not a surprising result for most of you. We all know that this is a high demand corridor, and it's the analysis helps to document that and hopefully move us towards a funding solution.
I had a quick question on the, let's see, on slide 6, you mentioned the comprehensive mobility analysis. And they think that service levels are about 20% lower than comparable peers. Does the routes we're looking at with the demand potential help capture, I guess, that combination of service level and the demand that we're hoping to see with increased ridership with some of these improvements?
I think the question is like, would a BRT level of service help to eliminate that gap? Yes, absolutely. It would be a step towards that. I don't think we've run the comparison of what percentage change that would create. And it would depend on what level of service is implemented, but certainly that would help to reduce the gap.
Thank you.
I think just on that note, while our span and our coverage is comparable or more than most agencies, where it comes as our frequency or headway on all routes that we're operating. So where we have a third of our routes with 30-minute frequency, weekdays, for instance, other agencies, peers would have all of their routes being 30-minute frequency. So on these BRT corridors, if we're increasing frequencies to 15 minutes on this one particular route, while overall our number of hours and miles of frequencies, I think it would still be one in which we'd still have that gap because not all of the services are 30-minute frequency. That's kind of what that speaks to, I think.
Thank you.
Then on slide 14, we also recommend a second BRT corridor. So this was essentially what came out as the number two option in our analysis. And that would be the Kishwaukee corridor. And we show dashed lines on the north end of it to indicate that there could be two potential options on the north end of this corridor. So Kishwaukee could be linked with Riverside and Rockton, ending up at the Walmart at Alpine. That is the corridor that was number 2 rated. It could also continue along North Main. That was the number 3 rated corridor. So there's a couple of options to potentially evaluate further, but we do feel that one of these options would be a strong choice for your second BRT corridor, and could potentially help to form a nice BRT network, creating a north-south connection in addition to the east-west connection that state offers. And of course, also helping to ensure geographic equity across the area. So that's the overview of the kind of the analysis findings. And with that, I'll hand it over to Matt to talk about operating. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not actually handing it over to Matt quite yet. My apologies. I have one more section. The section. The next section is dealing with the operating and capital needs of the corridors. Slide 16 looks at the potential operating plans for these different corridors. And so there's a table on the right side of the slide that describes what levels of service could potentially be justified on these different corridors. So we list Route 11 focusing on the west half of the corridor, Route 11 focusing on the entire length of the corridor. And then for the north-south options, we consider Riverside, Rockton, Kishwaukee, and also North Main and Kishwaukee. So for each of those, we recommend what level of BRT service might be justified based on a review of the actual ridership of the routes that serve these areas. The highest potential is the western half of Route 11. So that would be potentially a medium level of service compared to the peers. The other ones would probably be falling into the low category. On slide 17, we estimate the operating costs associated with each of these potential scenarios. So again, the same corridor options are shown on the left, and then on the right we estimate the operating costs that would occur annually. We show different scenarios. So there's one of the choices when implementing BRT would be the choice of whether you want to provide an underlying local service that continues to serve all of the local bus stops. Some agencies want to do that to ensure that no rider has to, lose their bus stop essentially. But also there's an added cost associated with that. So two different options there. The next slide estimates the fleet requirements of all of these scenarios. So you can see those figures on the table. Following slide looks at capital costs. Again, for the same scenarios, the same BRT corridors, we estimate the capital costs using the pure cost per mile, along with the high, medium, and low estimates of their infrastructure investments. And so these are, you'll see a fairly wide range of costs at this point in the process, but these are our estimates. Yeah.
The fleet requirements, is that, so we would need to purchase new vehicles designed for BRT, is it saying these are the total number of vehicles that need to be on the BRT, or we would need to?
Those are,
purchase?
yeah, this is representing the total number of vehicles that would be operating in peak service on any one of these routes and scenarios.
Got it.
And you could use various vehicle types. In theory, you could use your standard buses for these, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Your capital costs include the fleet.
And the capital costs include the fleet, exactly. So that is incorporated.
So we are assuming that the vehicles would be purchased, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that.
Okay, and at this point, I'll hand it over.
So the only point I want to make before we move into the last section here is you can see that we've got these kind of options, right? And a lot of that is, the technical analysis has sort of led us along this path. But, selecting a corridor and for investment is really a political process, right? So we're presenting this technical information and sort of saying, well, it's kind of fluid, it's kind of open-ended, and I think that's kind of part of what, we want to get out of the discussion here today. Which actually brings me to the last section, which is really about a strategic roadmap. So we are scoped to develop a roadmap of funding strategies. But it's a little bit of a choose your own adventure type process. And what I mean by that, and I'm on slide 21, which has kind of these boxes with the potential funding strategies, is there's multiple ways that you can do this. There's not one way. The first box, the upper left, is FTA Capital Investment Grant Program. And most of the BRT has been built in the United States, usually has come through that FTA process. So while I say there's more than one way to do this, that is the typical way that it is done, is through that process. But there are other funding strategies that you can employ. And it's really kind of an A/B type thing. You could either go into the FTA process and work through that and go through all the criteria, or you could try and put together kind of multiple funding sources to put together the capital and operating dollars you need in order to do something like this. And so the other boxes that you see on that first slide, raise grant, FTA bus and bus facilities, congressional earmarks, these are all kind of pieces that you could use to put together your funding dollars. And so what we really did is develop two roadmaps because, again, it sort of depends on which direction you want to go. And so now I'm on slide 22, and we've got, kind of two things that are sort of discussed there. We say small starts focus, and I should note FTA CIG, Capital Investment Grant, is also colloquially known as New Starts. You'll sometimes see that, or you'll see Small Starts, which is sort of a subset of New Starts. So when we say Small Starts focus, what we really mean is go into that, that big FTA program. One of the big benefits of doing the FTA program is that it's one pot of money. Usually that's the kind of most direct way you can get most of the money to do what you want to do on a particular corridor. And so a lot of transit providers go that direction because it's not quite one-stop shopping, but that's sort of the big benefit of doing it that way. If you do, the drawback of doing FTA small starts is that they have certain criteria, usually around the operating plan. You have to operate 15-minute service on the corridor. And so this kind of points back to what Michael was talking about with the operating scenarios. We sort of left that open-ended, partly because we're not sure which direction you actually want to go with FTA or not. But you would have to meet certain criteria within the corridor in order to do that. And I think that's kind of one of the things that you'll need to think about as you roadmap this out. If you do a mixed funding approach, I think the downside to that is that you've got to put together from multiple sources. There's no guarantee. You may get a raise grant, but then you don't get the IDOT money that you were hoping to get, or you're working with R1, but the IDOT grant didn't come through, or something like that. The upside, the most potential with the mixed funding approach is that you're not beholden to the operating criteria for those other things that you are if you go through the FTA process. So it's, there's pluses and minuses to kind of the different ways that you might do this. So that brings me to kind of the last two slides here. And basically what we did is we roadmapped both directions, both potential options here. So the first one is the small starts focus. And what we basically show is, what you would want to do on, say, a Route 11 BRT, what you might want to do on a second corridor, what you may do with other improvements to kind of help move the program along. And then it's sort of organized around a near term, a medium term, and a long term. And then the slide after that is if you did a mixed funding approach. And I'm not going to go through all the text here, although if you have questions. But one thing I will point out, and I think this is really kind of important, and you've seen this in other places with their BRT projects, is one of the things we're recommending is to increase the frequency, particularly on the Route 11. And some of that comes back to the idea that in good faith, as you're sort of saying, this corridor is important to us, this is where we want to invest capital dollars, this is where we want to invest operating dollars. It's really important to show, whether it's FTA or IDOT or whoever, that you're investing in that corridor and that the ridership in that corridor, the growth in that corridor is really important to you. So it's kind of like put your money where your mouth is or something like that. And so both in the small starts focus and the mixed funding approach, we're kind of saying that's one of the first key steps is to find those operating dollars to really help boost the travel market, the transit market that's in Route 1. And then as we kind of look outward, that's something potentially you could do in a second corridor if you're successful with that first corridor and really show that growth. So I'll stop. Yes.
Sorry, I was gonna ask, did you say, so regardless of whether it's the FTA route or the mixed funding, that recommendation would stand of increasing?
I think that's our recommendation because it's the right thing to do to build the ridership in the corridor. I will point out that that's probably more important in the FTA small starts focus because it's going to be a criteria for that grant program. It's not as required if you go on that mixed funding approach.
Thank you.
But it would benefit either way.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, you know, the transit implementation plan that you worked on a couple of years ago, I think, you know, that's one of the things that we looked at within that plan is, you know, where do you need more operating dollars and in which quarters? And of course, Route 11, East State is always the answer, right? So.
Questions?
I did have a question. There's a number of different, pieces that are included. Let's see, I'm going back to slide 7, I guess, on the peer agencies and, the things that are most often included. I guess, are there pieces within those 4 that the most your communities use the most often that really is like, I don't want to say silver bullet because I'm sure it's a combination of all of these things that make these successful, but one element that really drives ridership of those 4?
It's a good question. I don't know if I would point to any one of them. I do think it is a kind of combination of, you know, every strategy that can help to speed up service and improve access to the service. So, you know, every minute you can save for a customer is a step in the right direction, whether it's through service, be it through signal priority or, you know, spacing out the stations further or, you know, helping people get to and from the station.
When you look at this, when you look at the specific features of BRT, I mean, one item is high frequency service.
Yeah,
that's going to drive it. Then the rest are just more complementary than anything else, but the frequency will drive it.
I wouldn't imagine just doing the branding that we're faster and not changing anything else would be too.
We could say that our rebranding
was pretty good.
Yeah, our rebranding program with our buses maybe contributed some of our ridership recapture after COVID. I don't know, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
The questions?
More just looking at the recommendation to do the line between downtown and RU and then dotted line all the way out to the tollway. I remember from the previous presentation, that's because of the amount of infrastructure investment that would need to happen in that section. Or explain it again why that's the dotted section.
Yeah, so the eastern half of the route, it has lighter ridership than the western half, although it's obviously an important part of the route. But I think the real challenge there is the fact that the route has to deviate off of state in each direction to kind of serve the big box stores and other destinations. And so that's kind of, you know, BRT is trying to kind of mimic the experience of rail where everything is very direct. And so that kind of creates a challenge. And so, yeah, so there would potentially be some infrastructure or routing changes that would need to be figured out to make that work.
Okay.
It's a 1 hour route essentially, and so we're looking at just half of it. So once you get to SRU, you're doubling costs of both operating expenses and infrastructure essentially. And that section's from an infrastructure standpoint probably more costly than the infrastructure on the west end.
Exactly. And of course, it could also be a first step if, you know, if that's successful, maybe that leads to the.
Are fares handled differently between BRT and a typical route?
Yeah. They can be, but I don't think that's necessarily.
Yeah, not typically. I think in a lot of places it's the same fares.
And they'll look at when they talk about enhanced stations, you'll talk about off platform collection, similar to what you do with light rail or train, when you're validating your ticket before you step on. It's a lot of infrastructure and obviously management around fare evasion, things like that, but you don't necessarily have to do that. If you've got, really comes down to, the whole purpose of all of that is to reduce the amount of time, fare lapse and dwell time. So if our ridership is 40%, prepaid or free, you're already naturally through your fare policies reducing a lot of that dwell time involved at the location. So you may get just as much from having near level boarding at that location than what you would really get from the fare strategy, is because you're making it easier for the customers to step on.
Yeah. But no increase in price, like people don't make.
I think that's.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
typically the same as.
Yeah.
As a regular fare.
Yeah, and there are even examples where it's free, so.
And those are things that you can do. There's a number of different strategies that are employed depending on what you're doing. I think the other thing in here is that, as we mentioned, one of the strategies, obviously with the stop, with the enhanced station becomes reduction, and this is where the local versus the BRT service comes in, where you're actually increasing the distance between stops. So you're picking up as much of efficiency and moving it along faster by not stopping. So, right, so you go to a half mile, a quarter mile station or stops versus an eighth of a mile stops. And so those are all strategies as well as reducing stops. And if you do that, then do you want to ensure access by having something running underlying it all the time? So that's another strategy. Other questions? So, just kind of wasn't any particular action that we were looking at with the board today. It was more of becomes a planning document and a roadmap, and essentially what strategies we want to take from here to implement and deciding what a path forward could be. Obviously, there's a number of things that would involve stakeholders, and especially when you look at the cost breakdowns relative to operating expenses, increased amount of subsidy associated with that, and then the capital commitment on the vehicle side, which we have a little bit more bandwidth to manage around, but more so just what happens on the street, the infrastructure side. So CIG program or the mixed bag program, two different strategies. As you can see, there's some long timelines with these. It's not something that you just like buying a bus, you get the money and you go out and get the bus. There's a long process here, and once you start down that process, the CIG process, there's not anything necessarily guaranteed, because some of the CIG process is dependent on the federal funding portion of it and authorization portion of it. And so, again, the current budget dilemma that's at the congressional level, how much of the CIG program is going to be funded next year is a question. So there's no guarantees in terms of level of funding. But what this does, I think, outlines for us what the strategies are, where the priorities lie, and there's a number of different iterative steps we can take to build towards that as well. So when it comes into increasing frequency, well, if you do that, here's your vehicle allocation, here's the operating cost. We can build towards that and make the case that it is something worthy of a federal program investment. So I think we can use this as part of our strategy and planning efforts, and then look at what opportunities that may exist based on the recommendations to implement them over a period of time. That's fair. I was looking at, we adopt a plan, do anything in particular initially, but I think there's an effort here where both at the board level and then at the regional planning level with our stakeholders, where we look at the long range transportation plan, the metropolitan transportation plan that's being updated currently. BRT is outlined within that. This now gives us, a study that says here are the corridors that we've determined where BRT is viable, and that needs to be included in our region's metropolitan transportation plan. So that allows us to have those stakeholder discussions and determine what path we want to have as well. So that's part of this process that helps us as well as with that. But I think that's points we wanted to hit on with this today. Is there anything else that we've talked about? There's no other questions, then I think we can digest this and take this and have some follow-up conversations in the year end. So thank you so much, Michael, Matt, for coming in and leading us through this and actually doing the work and the meat and potatoes to develop this for us and have something that is, I think, a really functional technical guide and document for planning purposes we can use moving forward. Thanks so much for coming on.
Good. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. So moving on, last item on the agenda, or second to last item on the agenda. Got handouts to review here concerning the 2025 City of Rockford appropriation increase and a potential for a corresponding free ride program to consider. So going back to this past fall, city during their budget planning process reached out to us and asked us about what the potential cost would be to expand our free ride program beyond K through 12 and veterans program. If we expanded it to basically be the UPass program that exists today, but more so than that, make free rides for students in post-secondary education programs and all of our local institutions, as well as the adult and GED programs that we have in the community. What would be the potential fare box loss, if you will, that would be a cost to us if we would implement that? So we did a number of different projections on what that may look like using some experience that we have both with the UPass program at the post-secondary level, doing a head count of total enrollment in the community, which I included as part of the handout here, where, in our community through all the local main institutions, we're talking about the RVC, Rockford University, Judson, Rasmussen, NIU Rockford, U of I Medical School, OSF Nursing School. All that together is around 8,000 students typically annually, right? We have just some general cost projections on what, or ridership projections we have for the UPass program, but if we were to expand the UPass concept is free and make it a free ride program for all of those students, what would we expect for ridership? We've done some surveying in the past at Rock Valley University that suggests that we have about 14 to 17% of the population that ride RMTD. Another survey was taken asking how many people would ride if they had free transportation, increase that, like 90%, right? Anything that might have free, I'm going to use. But the reality is that we consistently see somewhere around 14 to 17% of ridership. So we're taking that number and using that as the basis for the 8,000 or so enrolled in all the programs. We came out to a number of rides that we would expect to take during the year, and the cost to buy a UPass, which is $27 per month, applying it to that. I think the formula works out that would cost us roughly $270,000+ a year in fare revenue loss if we allowed for all of that to happen, right? So that's the number we used that. Then with the GED program, we kind of went through the similar exercise of, we actually know the 3 institutions that regularly buy passes from us, buy fare media from us to fund rides for the program, which is RPS as a program, RBC as a program, and Goodwill as a program. And so we use that to base some ridership projections on that, and we would anticipate about a 12,600 estimated fare box loss if that was free. So between those two numbers on an annual basis, along with reevaluating what our ridership is today and projects to be for K through 12 free rides and veterans, which we far exceeded what we originally expected for those programs. And so the fare box loss there has increased. And then the fare policy changes that we've made here this past fall will accelerate that even more, we were estimating that we would lose an additional $27,000 in fare box revenue from that program, just on what we'd expect for that ridership to be this year. So you totaled all those up, we came up with $300,000+ in additional costs to us in fare box reduction that we would need to shore up in order to implement those programs. And so thankfully, the city of Rockford came forward and said, yes, we're interested in doing that. We would like to increase your budget appropriation for calendar year 2025 by 321,000 to 1,869,000 from its current level, which is 1,548,000. So with that, that's kind of what they'd like to see us do with that funding increase, and I think it's wholly and fully doable. The implementing the free rides for college students essentially would go to just accepting their current picture ID, student ID cards that are issued by the institutions. We just simply accept those as free rides, and currently you have to have that to buy a U-Pass. So we're just simply dropping the U-Pass portion of it, collecting the fare and just accepting the IDs and counting them as rides. We've reached out, and Orlando's done some quite a bit of effort in reaching out to the institutions to verify all of that in fact they do issue the ID cards, and if somebody wants to take advantage of the free ride, they must have an ID card, so they'll have to go and get that, but that they issue. So that seems easily done. The second part of that becomes with the adult GED programs. They don't issue picture IDs, and these are programs that are offered weekly, monthly. And so without a picture ID, we looked at options for that. And I think the most viable option is to take a look at just issuing them existing fare media that corresponds with the increments in time of their program. So if it's a monthly course or it's a 3-month course, then we would issue them a monthly a current adult monthly pass, a 30-day pass, and they can utilize that, and we can track that. They're coded, serial numbers are coded, and we can issue a badge to them in the back end of the fare box, identify who it was that rode, and have that ridership information. So those are the two approaches that we've looked at in terms of launching that in January, and if the board approves that, that would be the path that we would go. So part of this would be not only approving, implementing a free ride program for post-secondary and for adult GED, but it would also be discontinuing or suspending the U-Pass program and not collecting fares. And so we basically would reach out to Token Transit and say, don't issue or don't activate any passes anymore, selling passes through Token Transit, and we would stop distributing them here, the paper tickets here. It's pretty simple to turn it on. But we would need board action to both discontinue that program or suspend that program, and then approve the free ride programs for both those two groups that I mentioned. We're suggesting to do that as a 1-year pilot. Obviously, because it's contingent on City of Rockford budget appropriation, that I think we take a year to evaluate this, how it performs, the successes of it, and then verify that appropriation is going to continue. And I think sharing the success of it with them will reaffirm what I wanted. That's the recommendation, and I submit that forward. Any questions, have the answer, otherwise that'd be a motion meeting.
That's good.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Just on I assume it's regardless of the destination that it's free fare. So
Correct.
it wouldn't necessarily be to from the institution. It would be anything.
It's an unlimited access pass, similar to what we talked about with the Amazon program, and obviously the same thing with student rides, right? If you are have a valid high school ID currently 9 through 12, it's unlimited access no matter what your destination is. Yeah.
Well, I'll move that we approve the increased subsidy from the city of Rockford for the free ride program expansion as presented today.
And
Discontinuing
the U-Pass
Correct.
program
as a one,
and then this is a 1-year pilot.
Yes.
Initiative.
I will second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you. And then we have executive session, so aside from that, that's, the last item, other than the next board meeting, Aaron.
January 27th at 3:30.
Motion to motion.
Yes, Tricia.
Sounds good. Okay, we'll go into executive session to discuss collective bargaining matters pursuant to 5 ILCS 122C2 of the Illinois Open Meetings Act. Second. Aye.
That we come out of executive session.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. That we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.